This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Usually we cover a new product or technology, a smartphone most of the time, sometimes a notebook computer, an ultrabook, or a tablet. But today we're going to talk about how to figure out who you should buy your next cell phone from. You think that would be an easy decision, right? You either go to the local store that's convenient to you, or you look who has the best deal. For example, Amazon often has incredibly good deals on buying cell phones. Sometimes Fry's does, especially around the holidays. And then there's RadioShack as well. Well, if you're buying from a non-corporate store, it's a different deal altogether. And what do I mean by that? Non-corporate stores means someplace like Fry's, Best Buy, Amazon, RadioShack, and even the AT&T authorized reseller. And authorized reseller is the thing to pay attention to on the sign. They are not actually the carrier, and sometimes it can be hard to tell. If you're looking at a store sign and you see that big, say, Verizon Wireless logo, you think, hey, I'm going to a Verizon store. Again, you got to look for that authorized reseller underneath, or sometimes it's more obvious. It's a mall kiosk, a standalone thing. Those are not carrier stores. Or they'll have a different kind of name, like Sonny's Wireless Service and Repairs, that kind of thing. You know you're not in a Verizon store when you go there. And why does that make a difference? Well, when you buy directly from the carrier, I think most of us know right now how it works. If you get a contract, you get a discount on the phone, otherwise known as a subsidy. So that Nokia Lumia 900 that sells for $449 if you just pay the full retail price, well, it's $99 if you get it with the contract. That's cool. And if you cancel service after your trial period, which depending on your state of residence is either usually 14 days or 30 days, you're going to pay the ETF or early termination fee to the carrier. That's to make up for the difference between the retail and the subsidized price of the phone. Otherwise, everybody would go signing contracts and then selling those phones off for a great profit. So that's how the system works. It's pretty fair. Now, if you go to RadioShack, and my absolutely horrible experience with RadioShack is the reason we're actually doing this video, it makes me realize that people really do need to understand what's up when they're buying from different sellers. Now, when you're buying from the so-called authorized reseller or retailer, it's a totally different deal, and you may be entering into a separate contract. In fact, you often are. It's bad enough you got one contract with your cell phone provider. Right now, you've got two to worry about. And all this comes up because I had absolutely horrendous experience with RadioShack myself, picking up a new cell phone with service. And then I realized a lot of people don't even know all the things that I know after working in the industry for 10 years, and I should probably share some of that with you guys. So okay, you decide you want the latest, greatest new Droid whiz-bang on Verizon Wireless. And you look and you see, well, Amazon has it for free, right? And RadioShack has it for $1.99, and it's $2.99 at the Verizon store. So why would you ever go to the Verizon store? Well, you know, you don't have to, and obviously you can get a better deal elsewhere sometimes, but there's a lot of gotchas that can end up costing you more money in the long run. First is that awareness of the fact that you may have a second contract going with the person, or dealer rather, that you're signing with. See, each of these authorized retailers has their own separate agreement, and they can make up whatever they want as long as it's basically legal. And in our country, well, consumer protection isn't really a strong point, so there's a lot of dicey things going on. For example, if you decide to buy the phone from RadioShack, they have their own separate agreement, and that says that you can't change the line for 6 months. 6 months. So you're stuck with that service. Even though after 30 days or 14 days with the carrier, you're already locked in, you're going to pay that ETF. With RadioShack, you're going to have to stick on for 6 months. If you get it from Amazon, they're going to charge you $250 if you don't keep up that line of service for 181 days, that's 6 months and a day. So that can get a little bit iffy. So if you're not really sure you're sold on that phone and that carrier service, that's something to keep in mind. Number two is that most authorized resellers track you by that phone number that you get. And I know a lot of you guys start a completely new line of service so you can get the best deal possible on a cell phone. And you figure, well, that's okay, I'm good with that, right? Well, no. There's a couple of reasons why you may end up wanting to change that number, even if you do keep the service. And number one reason is these are hard times. Right now, a lot of people are actually canceling their cell phone service, not just because they can't afford to pay for it, but because they're getting a lot of calls from collection agencies. In fact, over the past 2 years, we've had about 20 review units that have that problem. We get calls constantly, day and night, from collection agencies trying to reach whoever last had that number. Now, if that's you, it's not only really annoying, it's going to eat up your cell phone minutes. Number two, what if the number you're assigned is just one digit different from the most popular Chinese takeout restaurant in your city? All day long you're getting calls for broccoli, beef, and wonton soup. Again, eating up your planned minutes, deranging you. You're going to want to change that number. Aha, but if you do that, then that authorized reseller is going to think you canceled service, and they're going to hit you for that extra termination fee. Now you may be able to contact that authorized reseller, say Amazon or RadioShack or whoever it is, and say, hey, look, I just changed the number. I really still have the line of service. It can be a lot of hassle to do. You may or may not have success with that. So was it really worth saving that $100 up front? Probably not so much. And lastly, again, these are hard times. You might take on an extra line just to get a great price on a phone, and you might unfortunately lose your job or take a pay cut and say, hey, I really can't afford this. I want to terminate it. Well, you could be hit with a really big bill afterwards. Now, some retailers like Best Buy actually don't have a separate contract and they're not going to hit you for anything else. Amazon's going to charge you $250 and you have to pay that in addition to your carrier's ETF. Now, RadioShack is the worst of all. They are actually going to charge you the full retail price of the phone. And guess what? It's not really the full retail price of the phone. It's going to be some exorbitantly high number that they make up and will not be on your service agreement that you sign with them. So you could be hit with, say, over $1,000 charges for a cell phone that you may not actually be able to use. Another thing that you should keep in mind is the fact that because you've got these two different agreements, they may have different terms. In our state, for example, with cell phone carriers, you have 14 days to try out the service and make sure it's any good. But the retailer might have a 30-day agreement, so you're already in a bind. And say you want to cancel within 14 days because you know the service is no good. Well, then you have to make sure to get good with the retailer. Likewise, you might discover after 3 weeks that the service isn't working out for you. You're already stuck with the ETF, and now you're trying to figure out what you should do with that retailer who may or may not hit you with some exorbitant fees if you don't return the phone, if you can return the phone. Again, was this worth that $100 you saved up front? Probably not so much. Definitely, if you want to take advantage of some of these authorized retailer deals, you should not just be doing this to jump ship for this really hot new phone that you see on a different carrier that you really want, because number one, that phone might not be as great as you thought it was, and number two, that carrier service is an unknown to you. If you're going to take one of these deals, I really suggest you stick with a carrier who you've used before, is proven, and most likely that service will be good, because you may be locked into it for half a year. Okay, so I bet you all want to know what happened to me with RadioShack. In October of 2011, yes, we're talking 6 months ago now, I decided I wanted to switch one of my lines over to Verizon Wireless to get the Droid Bionic. I wanted LTE, and there was no other LTE deal in the area at the time for fast 4G. And I like to have different lines of service with different carriers so I can continue to evaluate various phones and to evaluate the service as well. So hey, I like to save money like anybody else too, and I was aware of all these little iffy things, but still, I figured, well, RadioShack had it for $199, it was $299 at the Verizon store. I'd reviewed the Bionic, it worked out well for me, so I had no doubts it would be a fine phone for me, and the service seemed good. So I went to RadioShack and I bought the phone. Now, I purchased retail phones from RadioShack before, and again, I bought service with contracts from many third-party retailers before, but not from RadioShack. And my retail purchasing experience had been good, and they hadn't been charging these mysterious, highly inflated prices that they do when you actually terminate service with them, so I had no idea that that one was going to happen, nor did they put that one in writing. Anyway, I went in there, and the staff that I knew before, they were gone. There were some new guys there, and clearly things had gone downhill because I told them I wanted the Verizon Droid Bionic, and they said great. And then they couldn't figure out how to activate it. And they told me, oh, we never sell Verizon phones. You should just go get an AT&T phone. We know how to activate those. And I thought, oh, boy. Anyway, they ported my number over and managed to start a new account, and after an hour and a half, they still couldn't activate the phone or attach a data plan. So I gave up. Since my number was ported, I was stuck with this whole dealio, and I went home. And then I called up Verizon myself, got the right data plan, and actually activated the phone myself. Not a good time with RadioShack from the start there. Anyway, the phone worked fine. The Droid Bionic worked nicely for about a week, and then we had a storm. Here in Texas, as you've probably heard, we have some pretty nasty storms, and that sometimes can mess up the cell phone towers. So after a week, suddenly nobody could understand me on phone calls, and the phone was flagellating between 3G and 4G, giving me an effective standby of about 4 hours. Just standby of 4 hours on the battery, because the phone kept flopping back and forth between these two data plans. So I called up Verizon, and they were very helpful, and I told them I had a bunch of Verizon phones on my desk. They were all doing the same thing, so it wasn't a defective phone. And they said they'd investigate the network issue, and they were very polite, very courteous, and they said it would take about a week. By the time all that was resolved, it was past the 14-day agreement period with Verizon, so if things didn't work out, I was already hit for the $350 ETF if I had to cancel. That was bad enough, right? As it turns out, the news wasn't good. They said, well, service in your area isn't good. We're surprised it used to be as good as it was for you, and you're not on the upgrade path anytime soon, so It's just not going to get any better. So I was really bummed because I wanted that nifty LTE service. The Bionic was a nice phone. It wasn't the highest end phone available. The Droid Razr was coming out at that time, the HTC Resound, but I liked the phone well enough. But nonetheless, you can't really use a phone if nobody can understand you, for starters. Forget even that fast LTE data being there or not being there. And these things happen. I work in the industry. I know coverage can change at any time, and sometimes it just hurts a little. Meanwhile, when I'd gotten back to the office with all my agreement papers from RadioShack, I actually read everything carefully. I know a lot of people don't like to do this. Agreements are pretty boring, and I read all the laser printed stuff they gave me and the carrier information, and it told me what the price was that I paid for the phone, which was $199. It told me that I would sign up for a 2-year contract and how many minutes were on my voice plan, that kind of thing. And then I looked at the actual credit card receipt, the fine print, the teeny-weeny type that probably not many people read, and it said that RadioShack reserved the right to charge me for the retail price of the phone if I didn't have continuous service for 180 days. I thought, uh-oh, I better go back to the store and ask them about this before I cancel my service with Verizon. So I went back to the store and I asked a couple of sales guys that were there. One of them was the one who had helped me before, and the other guy was the one who tried to help him, neither of whom could actually figure out how to activate a phone. But anyway, I asked them, I said, what about this fine print on the receipt? And they said, well, there's no such thing in the agreement. What are you talking about? We don't say anything like that. I said, hi, you do. It's on the back of the credit card receipt, and you actually have to run a transaction, and then you'll see it. And they said, oh, that. They said, well, that's there because we used to sell phones at these great cheap prices, and then the customer would leave and never activate the phone. I can understand how they never activate the phone, since RadioShack can't figure out how to do it. Anyway, so they wouldn't be hit with the carrier ETF either, and they'd be off scot-free, and they'd have a $500 phone for $200, and they'd scam us. So, well, that's understandable. And then they went on to tell me that they get their commission from the carrier after 30 days, and as long as I held on to service for 30 days, I was golden. Sounded like a reasonable and believable story to me. I'd spoken to these guys a couple of times. Okay, that sounds like a plan. So I held on to the service for 36 days. Couldn't really talk on the phone for a good deal of that period of time, but I just held on just to follow their instructions, these salespeople at RadioShack, to make sure I wouldn't be hit with any surprise charges. After those 36 days, and after I had canceled my Verizon service and ported the number to a different carrier, I went back to the store yet again for a third time. I spoke to these two sales guys again, and I seem to recall the manager was there too, the guy who's still the manager at this point in the store, and they once again said, nope, you're not going to be hit for any extra charges. As long as you go on for 30 days, you're good. And they said, just in case, if I wanted to return the phone, could I? And they said, no, after 30 days, we won't take the phone back. And you're done with us. We're done with RadioShack Corporation. So I said, great. I paid the Verizon ETF $350 plus the service that I used for that period of time. So it was a very expensive experiment, but there it was. I now had a Droid Bionic that was useless, but if I had tried to sell it, it might have been worth $300 on the used market. I don't know. So I just gave it away to one of our readers, and that was that. It wasn't going to be of any use to me, unfortunately. Forgot about the whole thing, and then 5 months later, in March of 2012, a mysterious charge appears for $649 on my credit card bill from RadioShack corporate headquarters. And I thought, well, this must be some banking error or something like that. I hadn't even thought about what happened 5 months ago with that cell phone or RadioShack, so I disputed the charge with my bank. And my bank came back to me after researching it for another month. Boy, this is going on for a long time, isn't it? And they said, well, RadioShack says this is for the full retail price of a phone that you purchased back in October. And I was like, oh, no, not that. Boy, something is wrong here. So then I went back to this wonderful RadioShack again here in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, and I wanted to talk to them about this. I was pretty darn peeved, but I was civil about the whole thing. And I saw a new salesperson I'd never seen before. He was a nice guy. He was pretty helpful. And he said, well, the only thing is I can't do anything. I can't even access your account. Only the manager can. And he's at lunch. He said, I'll give him a call. And so he called him up, and I could hear the conversation. His manager's like, oh, I have to, cancel cell phone service. Of course it's going to be a problem. And I was like, oh, dude, really? Huh. So anyway, I was told the manager would be back from lunch in 15 minutes, and I should come back then, which I did. So I talked to the manager, and he said, well, I turned over my entire sales staff, so I can't actually verify any of this with them. Now, wouldn't that be a hint? There must be a reason that he supposedly fired his entire staff, right? Maybe they weren't telling customers the right thing, something fishy going on here. He said, so I can't verify what you said anyway, and, well, it's in our agreement. This is what it says on that little fine print, which he was now very aware of, on the bottom of your credit card receipt, and you're just hook, line, and sinker for this. So I said, now wait a minute, this phone retails for $499 with Verizon Wireless and with the manufacturer, Motorola. How is it you're charging me $850 total for this phone? And he said, oh, you're lucky. We usually charge more. And of course, you know what, that's capitalism at its best. Merchants can put any price on a product that they want. Of course, they don't tell you up front that, guess what, we're gonna call this an $850 phone if you happen to cancel your service and we don't get the commission that we want. And if that wasn't bad enough, remember, I paid that $350 ETF. So we're talking about one Motorola Droid Bionic that costs $1,280 now, folks. And it doesn't work, and I have no service. Okay, so I figured, you know, RadioShack salespeople, they don't have the best reputation. I'm going to try corporate, and I'm even going to pull some strings. I'm going to say, hey, I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. I'm an industry insider. I've been doing this for 10 years. I review all these products. Popular on YouTube. We've had a long-standing site with a good reputation. We don't just run out and attack companies or anything like that. I'm going to share this with the world. Help me out here a little bit. So I tweeted about this, and RadioShack said, oh, contact this help@radioshack.com email and we'll get this all straightened out for you. So I spiel this whole story into a long email and tell them about it. And then they say, oh, sorry, we can't help you because the salesperson's been fired. We can't verify any of this. And the other salesperson has no memory of this conversation, which says that they were kind of just lying and looking to cover up something all along because, number one, they know who my sales associate was because they can look that up on the sales record. The other guy that was there, I didn't mention him by name, and the manager already stated that he was fired. So they've made up a fictitious secondary salesperson, who knows who he was, and said that he can't corroborate my story because he doesn't remember. Well, folks, he doesn't even exist, so that's pretty dicey right there. And by the way, I went back to the RadioShack the last time. The manager also told me that I didn't have to pay a Verizon Wireless ETF. And he said this in a way that just told me even he didn't believe it. So I told him, oh, come on, dude, you know better than that. Every carrier charges an ETF. And he said, all right. I said, by the way, it's in that same fine print on the credit card receipt that you're quoting to me about the 6-month RadioShack deal? And he's like, oh, okay. So from the get-go, what have we learned from this? Never, ever, ever believe the salesperson that you're working with. It's much more imperative that you don't believe them if you're working with an authorized retailer because they have a separate set of agreements from the carrier. The carrier's agreements are pretty clear, they're written in stone. Corporate has the same line. If you contact, say, Verizon Wireless directly about any of their practices, no matter what the salesman said, they're going to make good on that. With these authorized retailers like RadioShack, no, number one, they may not train their sales staff. The people may be truly ignorant. Number two, the salespeople may lie just to sell more and get better commissions. Number three, for all we know, maybe headquarters tells them to use deceptive practices to sell more product. I really don't know. I'm not saying that is the case, but we don't know. Given their lack of concern, their lack of help, not once did they apologize and say, I'm sorry, this was a confusing experience and that things didn't work out for you. Nothing like that, because that might indicate that they were actually culpable in this. Just tells you, don't believe the salesperson, only go by what's in the written agreement, and be very careful because you may not actually get to see any of these written agreements until after you've actually made the purchase and thereby signed into the agreements. If that happens, look at the agreements right away. If it doesn't look good to you and kosher, immediately return the product to the store and don't even give them a chance to hit you up for a $1,280 cell phone. So why did I make this video? Not just because I am incredibly super duper disgusted and mad with RadioShack in particular, but because I'm an industry insider. I've been reviewing these products, work with the carriers, work with various retailers for 10 years now. I spent probably 50 hours a week researching this stuff and testing this stuff. And if they can fool me, they can probably fool you, because you're a normal person who doesn't even spend this much time researching these kinds of things, and you're probably not aware of this. And I don't want this to happen to you. Now, you may very well know that the carrier that you're signing up with that has good service in your area is going to stay that way. You're probably going to be happy with that phone, and that's cool if you want to save that $100. But otherwise, saving that $100, if you're not real sure, it can end up costing you obviously more than $1,000, and that is just not cool. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and that's the story.